evening, everyone. Thank you, sir, uh, for the wonderful illustration of the patient with liver disease coming for non-liver transplant surgery, and in details of the pre-op evaluation, sir has already discussed. I will be talking about anesthesia for hepatectomy and for TIPS procedure, which are very much a postgraduate level question that comes almost every year. So, okay, so I'll be discussing on the indications for hepatectomies, the criteria for selection of a donor and the evaluation of a donor, the hepatectomy surgery steps. We will be studying about hepatectomy surgery steps, the basics of it, the post-hepatectomy complications, and then come to tips. Tips, what we need to know about is the indications, the contraindications, and the optimization of a patient before we take up a patient for tips, and a little about the procedure and the complications after tips. So the indications for hepatectomy can be multiple basically. So a patient having colorectal carcinoma can come for hepatectomy for removal of the metastasis in the liver. It could be a hepatocellular CA or a cholangio CA for which a patient may come for hepatectomy. Following trauma, patient can come for a hepatectomy surgery. Benign liver tumors can also be one of the cause. One important category of patient for hepatectomy are donor hepatectomies, which we will be talking a little in details. Okay. So there are certain criteria for donor selection for a living donor liver transplantation surgery. So the donor has to be between age group of 18 to 60. The donor has to have a compatible blood group with the recipient. Like if the recipient is B positive, the donor can be B positive, or it can be O positive as well. The BMI of the donor should be less than equal to 30. Donor should not have any ongoing infection, hepatitis, or any history of any substance abuse. There should not be any malignancies or no major previous surgeries. Okay, so then we are coming to the extended criteria liver donors. This extended criteria is actually useful when we are going for a brain dead donor liver transplantation, a deceased donor liver transplantation, because the donor pool is already very small, and there to increase the donor pool, we can use this criteria for taking more donors for organ donation. So there we can take patients like even the donor is HCV positive, we can take from a HCV positive patient and give it to another HCV positive recipient. That is also acceptable. If the donor age if it is even more than 65, we can still take him as a donor. The BMI more than 30, we still accept. If there is liver enzyme that is raised above 3 times, still it is acceptable. Sodium of 165, more than 165, that is also taken. And if the donor liver has steatosis of more than 40%, that also can be taken. Although since we are taking the entire liver here, we are not taking a part of the liver, so we can still allow a 40% steatosis liver for liver transplantation from a brain death organ donor. Now, donor evaluation basically comes in 3 stages. In stage 1, we do the general history, physical examination, and the routine labs like CBC, LFT, RFT, the thyroid profile, the lipid profile, all these things. And we check for the blood group, that whether it is compatible or not. Now, any previous major abdominal surgery, any major active infections, that has to be definitely ruled out in the donor. And in the initial stage, we will go for the viral assay as well. So viral assay like hepatitis B, C, and HIV and all this to rule out that these infections are not there. After that, the stage 2 evaluation is the pulmonary evaluation, the cardiac evaluation of the donor. So details of pulmonary and cardiac evaluation for the donor is required, because hepatectomy is not a small surgery. Donor hepatectomy is not a small surgery, it's a major surgery. So pulmo-cardiac evaluation is important. After that, CT volumetry. This is something very interesting in a donor hepatectomy. CT volumetry has a few important factors that it covers. One is, in CT volumetry, we look for the total liver volume. Then we look for the right lobe of the liver, volume of that, along with middle hepatic vein. Then we look for the right liver lobe volume along with without middle hepatic vein. And usually in adult liver transplantation surgery, we take the right lobe. So after the right lobe is taken out, so the donor will be left with the left lobe. So we have to measure also the left lobe volume. So residual left lobe volume with middle hepatic vein and without middle hepatic vein. That is also assessed in CT. Why we are doing this? For two purposes. One is to calculate the GRWR, that is the graft to recipient weight ratio. This ratio calculation becomes important for a recipient so that the graft function is adequate. Whatever volume of graft the recipient receives, so that that volume is adequate for the recipient to replace its liver function. So the minimum GRWR ratio should be 0.8. That is acceptable. I have given here an example, like if the donor has if we have taken a graft of 500 grams from the donor liver and the recipient weight is 60 kg. So the percentage of GRWR comes as here 0.83, which is acceptable for the recipient, which works well for the recipient after liver transplantation to replace his liver function. Now, after the recipient thing we have sorted out, most important one very important thing remains for the donor is the how much liver we are leaving behind for the donor. That becomes very important. So the donor and the recipient should be approximately 30% body weight of each other. If the recipient's body weight is 30% or greater than the donor's body weight, then the donor will not be able to yield adequate size graft. So if the donor's body weight is too less and the recipient's body weight is too high, then the liver size will not match with each other. And this we will be able to find out by CT volumetry. So CT volumetry has a very important role in donor hepatectomies. And we must remember this thing, that minimum residual volume of the donor liver should be 30 to 40% of the total liver volume. Else, what will happen is the donor will have a post-hepatectomy liver failure risk, which is very dangerous. Another important thing is CT volumetry. In the CT scan of a donor is estimation of the liver attenuation index. So what is it? The density of a tissue is in proportion to the attenuation of the X-ray which pass through it. So liver attenuation index is measured by the difference between the mean hepatic and mean splenic attenuation. So liver always has a high attenuation than the spleen. So when the liver attenuation decreases, that indicates the liver is has significant steatosis. So when the steatosis is less than 5%, the liver attenuation index is more than 5. When the steatosis increases to 6 to 30%, the liver attenuation index becomes minus 10 to 5. So that means the liver is becoming more steatotic and its attenuation is getting reduced. So a steatotic liver from a donor should not be taken when it is more than 5% steatosis. That will increase the chance of post-hepatectomy liver failure for the donor. So in the stage 3 of liver donor evaluation, basically we see if we get a liver attenuation index of less than 5 in the donor, then we would try to find out whether the donor has fatty liver, and for that we will do a liver biopsy. In the stage 3, we do hepatic CT angio, MR angio for looking for the vascular anatomy of the liver, like the portal vein, hepatic artery, and the hepatic vein anatomy. For donor, we sometimes do a stress echocardiography to rule out any cardiac issues with the donor, and finally we do a psychological evaluation of the donor. Now, what are the contraindications for donor hepatectomy? These are like the simple things. Absolute contraindication will be extrahepatic, any malignancies, any diffuse liver tumor, any uncontrolled infection. If the patient has any drug abuse, alcohol abuse, these patients are definitely not to be taken as donors. The relative contraindication will be if patient is above 60 years, but then again, depending upon the since the donor pool is less, so we can still consider a patient above 60 years as a donor. Previous any malignancies, HIV infection and psychiatric disorder are related contraindications. Now, this slide over here is important in understanding liver surgeries and in understanding how liver surgery is done to reduce the blood loss. So here we can see the liver is classified, the functional classification of liver, the Conoids classification. Here we see the right lobe of the liver are is 5, 6, 7, 8. So this is a fist model. This is a fist model which gives us that these are the right lobes of the liver and these are the left lobe of the liver. So when this part is taken, this is right hepatectomy. And when this part is taken, this is left hepatectomy. And in between goes the middle hepatic vein. And these two are the left lateral lobes of the liver. So this is taken for pediatric donor. And this entire left lobe is taken for adult donor, for adult pediatrics. And this right lobe is taken for right hepatectomy for adult liver donors. So this anatomy is important. Particularly, we follow this anatomy so that the blood loss is reduced at the time of donor surgery, number one. Number two is whatever segment of the liver is removed, that segment is left, the rest of the segments are left with its individual artery supply, venous drainage and biliary drainage. So functional anatomy has to be followed at the time of donor liver hepatectomies. Now, accordingly, I have already told about this, that when right lobe is taken, when the left lobe is taken, and when the left lateral lobe is taken from the donor. Now, the post-hepatectomy liver failure. This is one very important thing. If the donor is not left with at least 30% liver, then there is a chance that the donor develops a post-hepatectomy liver failure. And the mortality of post-hepatectomy liver failure is as high as 30%. So how do we understand? On post-op day 5 onwards, if the patient starts developing increasing INR, increasing bilirubin, then we have to suspect that the patient might be developing post-hepatectomy liver failure. And if post-hepatectomy liver failure happens, that's a very dreaded complication for the donor. So now coming to the surgical steps of hepatectomy. In surgical steps, first we have to access the major structures, then we have to mobilize, then the surgeon goes for inflow control, that is hepatic artery and portal vein control, and then the outflow control, that is the hepatic vein control, and then the parenchymal transection starts. In the parenchymal transection, CUSA is used, which is called Cavitron ultrasonic aspirator. This is particularly for parenchymal resection of the liver, and this helps, basically CUSA helps in clipping and ligation of the vessels. So when CUSA is used, the chances of bleeding during donor hepatectomy is reduced. So it is very useful for reducing bleeding. Another thing that is used by the surgeons is for hepatic vascular control, because liver is a very highly vascular organ. So for vascular control, what other thing is done is Pringle's maneuver. And by Pringle's maneuver, two things are done basically. One is the bleeding is controlled. The next important thing is ischemic preconditioning is done for liver. What is ischemic preconditioning? Basically, it's a process in which there is a short period of ischemia separated by intermittent reperfusions. So 10 minutes, the clamp is placed, and then after that 10 minutes it is released. So this helps in ischemic preconditioning of the liver, and this will help when the liver goes completely out of its circulation in the cold ischemia phase, when the donor liver is taken out. That time it helps the hepatocytes to prevent the ischemic effect on the hepatocytes. So it gives some protection to the hepatocytes at that point of time. So ischemic preconditioning is something important in donor hepatectomies. Now, intra anesthesia is very standard. We go for general anesthesia with the CVP monitoring and arterial blood pressure monitoring, because hemodynamic fluctuations can occur at the time of dissection of the liver, particularly during the resection when the major structures are resected. With or without thoracic epidural, depends on centers and places. some places they prefer thoracic epidural, some places are already switching over from epidural to patient controlled analgesia PCA pumps. So it depends on center. So, and regarding the induction agent, there is little evidence to favor anything. Any propofol or inhalation anesthetic can be used for induction. Hepatic clearance of the drug will be definitely to some extent reduced after the resection of the liver. So that has to be kept in mind, and judicious use of the drugs has to be done. Measures to reduce blood loss has to be taken at the time of resection of the liver tissue. So that's why that time CUSA is to be used, and we try to control the CVP of the patient. So what is the role of epidural here? So role of epidural, there is some benefit and there is some risk factors. So that's why some centers are using epidural still, some centers are basically stopped using epidural. One benefit is it may help in reducing the CVP, so that way it will perhaps reduce the blood loss, and that's why it will reduce the transfusion as well. The second important thing is definitely it has a very important role in post-op pain management, the thoracic epidural. The risk factors of epidural are, if epidural is used, there may be some significant hypotensions at times, and that can lead to IV increased excess fluid administration, and increased transfusion also can happen if there is hemodilution and hemoglobin comes low, then we might have to transfuse the patient. Now, intra-op during resection of the liver bed, we try to reduce the CVP, because if the CVP is high, there is always a increased chance of bleeding, because liver tissue remains very congested that time if the CVP remains high. So that congestion has to be reduced, and for that we have to take measures to reduce the CVP. So how do we reduce the CVP? Basically, we limit the maintenance fluid at the resection phase. Resection phase, we try to give 4 ml to 6 ml per kg body weight fluid, not more than that. We may use diuretics at times if still CVP is high. 15-degree reverse triangular position of the patient is important to reduce the CVP. And PEEP we preferably avoid, because PEEP again increases CVP. So PEEP we avoid. So by this measures, we try to reduce the CVP so that there is less bleeding at the time of resection of the liver tissue, and there is less transfusion to the donor, because we don't try to give transfusion to the donor. We prefer avoiding transfusions. Then in the post-resection phase, after the resection, basically, then once the liver is resected out from the donor, then we have to restore the blood volume, because we have already, there has been a significant blood loss at the time of resection, and we have restricted the fluid to keep the CVP under control. So at this time, we should be giving adequate crystalloid. Adequate means 8 to 10 ml per kg body weight. We can still give. Looking at the hemodynamic parameters as well. To maintain, a very important thing that we follow is maintain a urine output of more than 0.5 ml per kg per hour. If that is maintained, then we don't try to overload the patient. We still try to do a goal-directed fluid therapy for the donor as well. And if boluses are required, if the BP is low or urine output is low, then we can still manage with albumin 20% bolus or a crystalloid. And if hemoglobin is low, obviously we give PRBCs. And on-table extubation we prefer for the donor, along with epidural infusion is already there. So for the post-op pain management, to take care of the post-op part, so we try doing on-table extubation. In the post-operative management, so basically in the post-op management, pain management is very important. So that is mostly done with epidural. Some centers will do with PCA pump with IV opioids, but we have to be careful if IV opioids may make the patient a little drowsy. So we have to be careful with that, because we have to mobilize the patient as well, as early as possible, to prevent the lung complications. The lung complications can be post-op, very commonly post-op atelectasis. So we give a very good aggressive chest physiotherapy, and early CPAP we use for post-op lung complications, to prevent post-op lung complications. Post-liver resection, what are the risk factors? So that we have to remember in a donor. So in a donor, the risk factors that are there for after the liver is taken out. one important thing is initial the liver enzymes within 24 hours goes high, but it should come down in 5 to 7 days. If it is not coming down and the bilirubin is also going high, so we have to think whether the patient is developing post-hepatectomy liver failure. So then we have to worry for that. Otherwise, the enzymes will come down by 5 to 7 days. Now, the biliary complication is the most common complication post-hepatectomy. That can happen. So you have to be careful. If we are suspecting any biliary complication, any biliary leak, then we have to go for a CT. Again, a repeat CT to rule out if there is any bile leak happening. Basal atelectasis, lung atelectasis that I have already said, very common. So we use CPAP and aggressive chest physiotherapy. Effusion on the right side of the chest is common, but it goes off after a few days. Coagulopathy is seen usually within 24 to 48 hours, but it is self-limiting within 5 days. So we have to remember when we have put a thoracic epidural, since the coagulopathy remains for a few days. So when taking out the thoracic epidural, you have to be careful after the coagulopathy has settled, when the liver, the INR and everything has come back near normal, then only we should pull out the thoracic epidural after 4 to 5 days, by which the coagulopathy settles usually. Now we, so this is like overall about donor hepatectomies surgeries. Now we move on to TIPS procedure. So TIPS is again a very important question for postgraduates. TIPS patients, we have to remember that TIPS patients are a CLD patient who is severely decompensated patient, so they are high risk patients, quite difficult patients. TIPS, what is TIPS procedure? It is a communication created between a portal and systemic circulation. So TIPS is placed to reduce basically portal pressure in a patient who has already complications of severe portal hypertension. The portal hypertension has to be severe. So usually what happens when the patient's portal pressures are more than 20, patient starts bleeding from the varices, from the esophageal varices, and these are the situations when TIPS are required. And definitely TIPS is less invasive than any surgical communication between the portosystemic communication like lienorenal shunt and all. So post-operative complications are definitely less with TIPS than a surgical portosystemic shunt. So definitely TIPS is preferred over a surgical procedure. So here in TIPS, basically we try to create a portal and vein and hepatic vein, a communication between the two. So when we are doing, basically what is the goal? Goal is to reduce the hepatic venous pressure gradient to less than 12 so that there is no recurrence of bleeding, mostly which happens from esophageal varices. And the other goal is, if it is used, if the TIPS is used for refractory ascites, then our target is to reduce the hepatic venous pressure gradient to less than 8 millimeters of mercury, so that the refractory ascites can be handled to some extent. Now, what are the indications for TIPS? One, there are significant evidence for using TIPS in two situations. One is refractory ascites and one is variceal bleeding. The variceal bleeding, when there is a variceal bleeding, TIPS can be used in emergency within 24 hours when the patient comes to emergency and is bleeding massively and it cannot be controlled. So as an emergency procedure, TIPS can be done. The other thing is, once the emergency is under control, and then after that, when the patient is bleeding has stopped, but hepatic venous pressure gradient is still above 20, so patient has again a chance of recurrence of bleeding later sometime. So in that situation, if you are using TIPS, TIPS becomes very useful. So these are the indications very significantly where TIPS is useful. The limited evidence are portal hypertensive gastropathy, the refractory hepatic hydrothorax, hepatorenal syndrome, Budd-Chiari syndrome, where there is there are thrombosis in the hepatic veins, hepatic veno-occlusive disease, hepatopulmonary syndrome. In all the situations, there are little evidences that TIPS may be useful. When other measures fail, when other conservative measures fail, then TIPS may be useful in such conditions. Okay, so the contraindications of TIPS. Before we understand this, we have to understand the physiological changes that happens with TIPS. So after the TIPS is done, there is basically a portosystemic shunt that is created between the systemic circulation and the portal circulation, overcoming the high portal pressure. So whatever blood was there in the portal circulation, that comes directly to the systemic circulation. So there is a volume overload in the systemic circulation. So this volume overload can lead to heart failure. So patient who is already having a compromised heart, who is already a heart failure patient, there we should preferably avoid tips. Number one. Number two is if patient has severe pulmonary arterial hypertension, tips will increase the chance of pulmonary arterial hypertension even further. So if a patient has a pulmonary arterial hypertension of more than 45 millimeter of mercury, we should preferably avoid tips in those patients. And sepsis and biliary obstruction obviously will not go for tips. Relative, there are certain contraindications like if there is a hepatocellular carcinoma, if there is obstruction to hepatic vein, if there is portal vein thrombosis, if there is severe coagulopathy and thrombocytopenia, then definitely there is increased chance of bleeding during the procedure. So we cannot go for tips. So pre-procedure evaluation of a patient with tips. So when a patient comes for tips, we have to evaluate the patient that whether his liver function test, see a complete blood count, RFT, LFT, everything has to be checked because we have to remember that this is a chronic liver disease patient with decompensation who has come for tips. So these patients, child class has to be usually preferably child A and child B and males less than 18. So relatively preserved patient with a decompensation would be suitable candidate for tips. If patient is too much decompensated, then tips will cause further worsening of the patient of a chronic liver disease. So that has to be kept in mind. And if the patient has does not have a good ejection fraction, good cardiac function, then definitely they will have an increased risk of heart failure because of the volume overload. So we should avoid tips in them. PFT has to be done, and if there is a pulmonary arterial hypertension significant, then we cannot do tips for that person, that patient. And one very important thing is hepatic encephalopathy. If a patient has hepatic encephalopathy, we should preferably avoid tips because already post tips, the chance of hepatic encephalopathy increases. So these are the things. So what we do in tips procedure, basically it is a procedure that is done in the angiography suite by an interventional radiologist. So we access the internal jugular vein, and then we put a catheter through that vein, and we measure the hepatic venous pressure gradient, and hepatic venography is done, and then a communication between a branch of the hepatic venous system and the portal venous circulation is created by the cutting tip of the catheter. So by the catheter tip, a communication is created between the hepatic vein and the portal vein under fluoroscopic guidance. And then during the TIPS procedure, after this, there is a metal stent that is placed, which is usually 1 centimeter to 1 into 8 centimeter stent size metal stent is placed, and that shunt basically maintains the patency of the photosystemic shunt that is created. So metal shunt is basically placed. So this is the way how we go about the procedure. So before taking up a patient for anesthesia for tips, in optimization, you have to basically see whether the patient is coagulopathic. If coagulopathic, that has to be corrected. INR to be taken to at least nearly 1.5, platelet count 50,000, so that patient doesn't bleed too much at the time of procedure. And in case patient has variceal bleeding, if the hemoglobin is too low because of the bleeding for which patient has come, then we should transfuse the patient when the hemoglobin is less than 7. If it is less than 7, we should transfuse and bring the hemoglobin to an acceptable level. If the patient has come for tips for recurrent after post paracentesis, then post paracentesis patients will require some albumin during the procedure, or maybe before starting the procedure. Before starting the procedure, we can give for each 2.5 ml of draining of ascites fluid, we will give 8 grams of albumin. So if the patient has undergone 5 to 6 liters of fluid drainage of a refractory ascites patient who comes for tips, so then in that case we'll give 1 or 2 albumin before we start the tips procedure for renal as well as circulation to remain under to prevent the impairment of the circulation and the renal system at the time of the procedure under anesthesia. Now, anesthesia per se can be done in 2 possible ways for tips. One is conscious sedation, one is general anesthesia. But there are certain problems with conscious sedation. The problems with conscious sedation will be, we can give combination of short-acting sedatives like midazolam, propofol infusion, fentanyl infusion. But the problems will be patient might have a problem lying supine. There might be airway problems with the patient. So that might be one problem. When the patient is lying supine for a long time during the procedure, patient might be agitated because of encephalopathy. Patient might be agitated, so that could be another problem. So the other choice is general anesthesia. During general anesthesia, sedative pre-medication we should avoid because patient might be having hepatic encephalopathy. During anesthesia, we have to create a central venous access and invasive arterial monitoring. And for TIPS patient with a large ascites, usually they come with decompensated liver disease, so rapid Sukin induction is preferred. And then anesthesia for a patient with chronic liver disease, a general anesthesia, that same rule has to be followed for giving anesthesia for a TIPS patient who comes for general anesthesia, whom we select for general anesthesia. And then cautiously select the dose of the drugs. So you have the dose of the drugs. You have to remember that the patient is a decompensated chronic liver disease patient. So induction with propofol with a low dose, comparatively lesser dose. Muscle relaxant is definitely at when we are doing rapid sequence induction, we can use succinylcholine followed by atracurium and fentanyl for maintenance of anesthesia. And then for maintenance, we can use total intravenous or volatile. There is no specific choice for that, but definitely the drugs has to be used very judiciously in a chronic liver disease patient. That is what has to be kept in mind when we are giving general anesthesia for a TIPS patient. And then the complications, there can be several complications during the procedure and post-procedure. During the procedure can be hemoperitoneum, there can be puncture of the liver capsule, so there can be huge amount of blood loss, bleeding, and then that time might have to transfuse a lot. Then post-TIPS, there can be fistula between the portal vein and the biliary tract. Stent, what the stent that we place, there may be malposition and the stenosis of the stent, and then patient might come for repeat TIPS procedure again and again. That might happen. TIPS thrombosis can occur in 5 to 10% cases, and then it usually happens after 1 month to 6 months time. So patient may come for after TIPS thrombosis has happened. Patient may land up with encephalopathy because TIPS basically causes creates a portosystemic shunt. So whatever blood was there in the portal circulation comes directly to the systemic circulation without any metabolism happening in the liver. So ammonia and the neurotoxins directly goes to systemic circulation, so increasing the ammonia level in the blood. So this can predispose a patient to highly predispose a patient to encephalopathy. So TIPS, one of the very important complication in 30 to 50% cases of TIPS, we will see there is encephalopathy. So encephalopathy is a very important complication. And that's the reason why when a patient has hepatic encephalopathy, we cannot take up the patient for TIPS procedure. And congestive heart failure, as I've already said, the volume load in the systemic circulation can lead to congestive heart failure, so we have to be careful. And post-TIPS, definitely there is risk of fever and infection. So proper antibiotic coverage has to be done. So thank you everyone. I have a few poll questions as well. After going through the slides, I think now people will understand all the answers. Yeah, so most dreaded complication post hepatectomy. This is one poll question.
You can just read out the options.
Okay. Yeah. So my options were basal atelectasis, biliary leak, post hepatectomy liver failure, and coagulopathy. So these were my options. I hope everybody will be able to get it now.
Just wait for them to answer. Wait for them to answer for 5 seconds. And after 5 seconds, we can close the poll. Yeah, I think you can close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0.
Okay.
So do we discuss now only? Do we discuss now?
She can tell us the answer. What is the correct one?
So the third one is the correct one, which is
Most people have got it right. Most people have got
Yeah,
it right.
83% has voted for that.
Yeah, the
Okay.
most graded complication. Yeah, and the next I have
Go to the
another.
next poll one. Yeah. Just wait for the poll to appear. Read it out.
Yeah, so most common indications for tips in portal hypertension patient, that also we have discussed. So the most common indications, I have given 4 options: refractory ascites, recurrent variceal bleeding, hepatic hydrothorax, and hepatorenal syndrome. So which is the most common indication for a patient coming for tips in the emergency or maybe elective tips procedure?
I think you can close the poll in again 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0.
Yeah. So
Yeah, what is the correct answer?
the answer is B, basically recurrent variceal bleeding. That's the most common indication for which patient comes for TIPS procedure. But refractory ascites is also definitely a very important indication, but definitely not the most common.
Okay, so I think most of them have got it.
Yeah,
in
most
here.
of them have got it right. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay,
everyone.
thank you very much, Shweta. Thank you very
Thank you,
much
sir.
for an excellent presentation. And
Thank you.
as I said, we will go to the question answer session right at the end.